A poor young black man is carefully studying waste samples when he suddenly steps on a wallet stuffed with cash. Not knowing what to do, he spots an old man searching nearby, approaches, returns the wallet, and refuses the reward. 3 days later they meet again in an unexpected situation, and when the old man's true identity is revealed, the young man's life changes forever. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you watching from. We love to hear your thought. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the narrow alleyways of Riverside District, where broken streetlights flickered like dying fireflies against crumbling brick walls. Plastic bags danced in the humid breeze, catching on chain-link fences and fire escapes that hadn't seen fresh paint in decades. The smell of rotting garbage mixed with the distant aroma of fried food from corner bodegas, creating the familiar cocktail of urban decay that most people hurried past without a second glance. But Marcus Johnson wasn't hurrying. He never did. 26 years old, with calloused hands and clothes that had seen better days, Marcus crouched beside an overflowing dumpster, carefully sorting through plastic bottles and containers. His weathered notebook lay open beside him, pages filled with meticulous handwriting, numbers, dates, types of plastic, estimated weights. A pencil stub tucked behind his ear had worn smooth from constant use. "Let's see," he murmured to himself, holding up a water bottle to examine the recycling symbol on its bottom. Type 1 PIT, condition fair. He jotted down another note, his brow furrowed in concentration. The sound of footsteps echoed off the alley walls. 2 women in business suits approached, their heels clicking against wet pavement. As they passed, one nudged the other and whispered, loud enough for Marcus to hear, "Look at that." Another homeless guy digging through trash. So sad what this neighborhood's become. Her companion glanced over and shook her head, probably looking for bottles to cash in. "I heard they get 5 cents each." Marcus's hand paused over his notebook. He'd heard variations of this conversation 100 times before. His shoulders tensed slightly, but he didn't look up. Instead, he carefully placed the bottle in his collection bag and continued working. "If I can just gather enough data points," he whispered to himself, the same quiet mantra that had sustained him through countless similar moments, "I'll find the pattern, I'll find the solution. Someday, these alleys will be different." The women's voices faded as they disappeared around the corner, leaving Marcus alone with the distant hum of traffic and the soft scratching of his pencil against paper. He filled an entire page with measurements and observations before finally standing up, his knees protesting after an hour of crouching. His collection bag bulged with bottles, cans, and plastic containers, not the random pickings of someone desperate for spare change, but a carefully curated sample representing different types of waste from various sources throughout the district. Each item served a purpose in his research, part of a larger vision that most people couldn't see past the surface appearance of a young man sorting through garbage. Marcus slung the bag over his shoulder and picked up his notebook, flipping to a page marked Community Recycling Initiative, Phase 2 Data Collection. The heading was written in careful block letters, underlined twice. Below it, weeks of observations filled the margins: peak waste generation times, types of recyclable materials most commonly discarded, potential collection points, estimated volumes. As he walked toward the mouth of the alley, his footsteps echoed with quiet determination. The skeptical voices, the sideways glances, the assumptions, they all rolled off him like water. He'd learned long ago that conviction required sacrifice, that innovation often looked like madness to those who couldn't see beyond the present moment. At the mouth of the alley, where the narrow passageway opened onto Maple Street, an elderly man stood under a flickering streetlight, patting his pockets with increasing urgency. His silver hair was neatly combed, his charcoal suit expensive but understated. Everything about him spoke of success and sophistication, from his Italian leather shoes to the gold watch catching the dying light. "Where is it?" the man muttered, checking his jacket pockets for the 3rd time. "I just had it." Marcus emerged from the shadows carrying his bag of bottles and cans, notebook tucked securely under his arm. As he stepped into the circle of lamplight, he noticed something dark on the sidewalk near the elderly man's feet. "Excuse me, sir," Marcus said quietly, bending down to retrieve a black leather wallet. "I think you dropped this." The elderly man, Harold Whitmore, though Marcus didn't know his name yet, turned around quickly. His eyes immediately took in Marcus's appearance, the stained work clothes, the bulging bag of recyclables, the dirt under his fingernails from sorting through dumpsters. Harold's expression shifted through a series of micro-emotions: surprise, wariness, and something that looked almost like pity. "Oh," Harold said, reaching for the wallet with obvious relief. "Thank you, son. That's very honest of you." He opened the wallet and quickly counted the cash inside, several $100s in 20s and 50s. Everything was there. Harold looked up at Marcus with a mixture of gratitude and confusion, as if trying to reconcile the young man's appearance with his integrity. "Here," Harold said, pulling out a $50 bill. "Take this. It's the least I can do. I know you probably need it." The words hung in the air between them. Marcus looked at the offered money, then up at Harold's face, reading the assumptions written there as clearly as the data in his notebook. Here was another person who saw the bags of recyclables and drew the obvious conclusion. Marcus smiled, not with bitterness, but with the patient understanding of someone who'd navigated this misperception countless times before. "That's very kind of you, sir, but I can't accept it," Marcus said, his voice gentle but firm. "And it's not what you think. I'm not collecting these bottles to survive. I'm researching waste patterns for a community recycling initiative I'm developing." Harold blinked, clearly caught off guard. He glanced at the bag of bottles, then at Marcus's notebook, then back at Marcus's face. The young man's eyes were clear and intelligent, his speech articulate despite his appearance. "Research," Harold repeated slowly. "I'm mapping waste generation patterns throughout this district," Marcus explained, shifting the bag to his other shoulder. "Different neighborhoods, different times of day, different types of refuse. I believe there's an opportunity to create a more efficient community-based recycling system that could significantly reduce waste volume while creating local employment." Harold stood there for a long moment, studying Marcus with new eyes. The confident way the young man spoke about his project, the careful organization visible in his notebook, the thoughtful consideration behind what had initially appeared to be random bottle collecting, it all painted a very different picture. "I see," Harold said finally, though his tone suggested he was still processing this revelation. "And this research of yours, it's for a business plan?" "It's for the future," Marcus replied simply. "I grew up in this neighborhood, I know what it could become." Something in Marcus's voice, the quiet certainty, the absence of self-pity or defensiveness, struck Harold in a way he couldn't quite explain. Here was a young man who'd been completely misunderstood, who'd gracefully handled that misunderstanding while returning a wallet full of money he probably needed more than its owner did. "What's your name, son?" Harold asked. "Marcus Johnson." "Marcus," Harold extended his hand for a firm handshake. "Thank you again for returning my wallet. And I apologize for my assumptions." Marcus shook his hand with a grip that spoke of honest work. "No apology necessary, sir. I understand how it looks." As Harold walked away, he couldn't shake the image of Marcus standing under that streetlight, patient and dignified despite being misjudged. There had been something in the young man's eyes, not desperation or defeat, but determination. The kind of quiet strength that Harold recognized from his own early days building his business empire. The Saturday morning sun painted the suburban landscape in gentle watercolors: white picket fences, small front yards with struggling gardens, and the occasional dog walker nodding to neighbors. It was the kind of neighborhood where people still knew each other's names, where children could play in the streets without constant supervision. Harold Whitmore's black sedan moved slowly down Elm Street, his driver navigating carefully around a group of kids riding bicycles. Harold sat in the back seat reviewing property development plans, but his attention kept drifting to the window. He'd built his fortune by understanding communities, by knowing what people needed before they knew it themselves, and that meant spending time in the places where ordinary people lived their lives. The proposed development site was just ahead, a vacant lot that his company was considering for a small shopping complex. Nothing fancy, just the kind of practical retail space that served working families, a grocery store, a pharmacy, maybe a laundromat. Harold liked projects that solved real problems for real people. But as the car rounded a corner, Harold's attention was captured by something unexpected. "Stop here for a moment," he told his driver. Across the street stood a modest building with a hand-painted sign reading Riverside Children's Home. The structure was old but well-maintained, with bright yellow trim around the windows and a small playground where several children were playing on swings and a slide that had seen better days. But it wasn't the building that had caught Harold's attention. It was the figure approaching the front gate, carrying several large boxes and bags: Marcus Johnson. Even from a distance, Harold recognized the young man who'd returned his wallet 3 days earlier. But this time, Marcus wasn't carrying recyclables. The boxes appeared to be filled with groceries and supplies, and his arms were loaded with what looked like clothing and school materials. "Sir?" the driver asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Just wait a moment," Harold said, rolling down his window slightly. The sound of children's voices carried across the street as the front door of the children's home burst open. A small mob of kids, ranging in age from about 6 to 14, came running out with delighted shouts of "Marcus, Marcus is here, and what did you bring us today?" Harold watched in fascination as Marcus set down his boxes and was immediately surrounded by excited children. The young man's face transformed completely. The serious, focused expression Harold had seen in the alley was replaced by genuine joy as kids tugged at his sleeves and chattered over each other in their eagerness to see what he'd brought. "Did you remember the colored pencils?" asked a girl who couldn't have been more than 8, bouncing on her toes. "Of course I remembered," Marcus laughed, ruffling her hair. "They're in the green box, along with some new drawing pads." "What about the science books?" chimed in an older boy with thick glasses. "Second box from the left," Marcus replied, pointing. "Including that book about marine biology you asked for, Tommy." The children organized themselves with the efficiency of a well-drilled team, each taking charge of specific boxes and bags. Harold noted how naturally Marcus directed the operation, not with authority, but with the easy leadership of someone these kids genuinely trusted and respected. A middle-aged woman in a simple blue dress emerged from the building, smiling as she watched the organized chaos. Sister Catherine had been running the children's home for 15 years, and Harold could see in her face the particular mixture of fondness and exasperation that came with caring for a dozen energetic kids. "Marcus," she called out warmly, "you spoil them." "They deserve to be spoiled," Marcus replied, helping Tommy carry a particularly heavy box toward the building. Besides, Mrs. Patterson at the corner market was throwing out perfectly good produce just because it had a few brown spots. "I couldn't let it go to waste." Harold's eyebrows rose slightly. Even Marcus's charitable visits to the children's home were strategic, carefully planned and executed as part of a larger resource optimization plan. This wasn't random generosity, this was systematic care. As the group moved toward the building, Harold found himself getting out of his car. "Sir?" his driver called, but Harold was already crossing the street. The activity room of the children's home hummed with the comfortable chaos of Saturday afternoon. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced above scattered toys, art supplies, and the general debris of a dozen children following their various interests. Marcus sat cross-legged on the worn carpet, surrounded by his usual crowd of admirers. Maria, the shy 6-year-old, had claimed the spot directly beside him, and was carefully sharing her apple slices with anyone who looked hungry. Tommy, the bookworm with thick glasses, was explaining the finer points of marine biology to anyone who would listen, using the new book Marcus had brought as his primary reference. Harold observed all of this from just inside the doorway, having been invited to stay for a few minutes by Sister Catherine. He found himself studying the dynamics of the group, how naturally the children gravitated toward Marcus, how easily he shifted between being their friend, their teacher, and when necessary, their gentle disciplinarian. "Marcus," Sophie called out, holding up a drawing she'd been working on. "Look, I drew our new playground." The picture showed a colorful scene with swings, slides, and what appeared to be several very tall, very purple trees. Stick figures of children played throughout the scene, and in one corner, a figure labeled Marcus was pushing a smaller figure on a swing. "That's beautiful, Sophie," Marcus said, accepting the drawing with the gravity of an art critic examining a masterpiece. "I especially like how you made the trees so big and strong. Trees are important, you know. They clean the air and give us shade." "Like your recycling company will clean the air?" asked Tommy, looking up from his marine biology book. Marcus's smile flickered for just a moment, so briefly that Harold might have missed it if he hadn't been watching so carefully. When Marcus answered, his voice was as warm and encouraging as always, but Harold caught the slight tension around his eyes. "That's the plan, buddy," Marcus said. "We're going to figure out better ways to handle all the waste in the neighborhood, turn it into useful things instead of just throwing it away." "When will you start the company?" Maria asked, leaning against Marcus's shoulder with the unconscious trust of a child who'd never been let down. This time the pause was longer. Harold watched as Marcus seemed to weigh his words carefully, trying to maintain hope while being honest. "Soon, I hope," Marcus said finally. I'm still working on getting the money to start. Banks want to be very sure about these things before they'll help someone begin a new business. But you've been trying for a really long time, Sophie observed with the brutal honesty of childhood. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his hand absently stroking Maria's hair as the little girl dozed against his shoulder. Harold could see the weight of accumulated disappointments in the young man's posture, the slight slump of his shoulders, the way his free hand unconsciously clenched and unclenched. Sometimes important things take time, Marcus said eventually. The most worthwhile dreams are usually the hardest ones to make real. Sister Catherine appeared at Harold's elbow, carrying a tray of cookies and milk for the children. She moved quietly through the room, distributing snacks with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been managing group snack time for years. Marcus, she said softly, pausing beside him, don't look so worried, child. When someone lives for others the way you do, the universe has a way of sending help. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, and Harold saw Marcus lean into that touch slightly, the gesture of someone who'd learned to accept comfort where it was offered. I know, Sister Catherine, Marcus replied. These kids deserve better than this neighborhood can offer them right now. They deserve clean air, and safe streets and opportunities that— He stopped himself, glancing around at the children who were listening with varying degrees of attention. Harold noticed how carefully Marcus modulated his words, never wanting to suggest that their current situation was inadequate, never wanting the children to feel that they were somehow lacking. They deserve the world, Sister Catherine finished for him, her voice warm with understanding. And they'll get it, maybe not in the way you're planning, maybe not as quickly as you'd like, but they'll get it. Faith, Marcus, faith. Harold found himself unexpectedly moved by the exchange. He'd spent his entire career surrounded by people who wanted things from him, investors seeking funding, employees angling for promotions, competitors trying to outmaneuver him. But here was someone asking for nothing except the chance to give more. Sister Catherine's office was a study in organized chaos. Filing cabinets lined 3 walls, their contents bulging with years of case files, medical records, and the administrative paperwork that seemed to multiply exponentially in any institution dedicated to caring for children. A desk buried under stacks of forms and correspondence dominated the center of the room, while a small bookshelf held a mixture of child psychology texts, religious literature, and what appeared to be several dozen handmade crafts that had been given as gifts over the years. Harold sat in a mismatched chair across from Sister Catherine's desk, feeling somewhat out of place in his expensive suit among the humble surroundings. Through the thin walls, he could hear the distant sounds of children playing, their voices a constant background soundtrack to life at the children's home. I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me privately, Harold began, setting down his coffee cup on the one clear corner of Sister Catherine's desk. After observing Marcus with the children today, I find myself curious about his background. Sister Catherine leaned back in her chair, studying Harold with the careful attention of someone who'd spent years dealing with social workers, potential adoptive parents, and various officials who came asking questions about her charges. Her expression was neither welcoming nor hostile, simply cautious. Marcus isn't technically our business anymore, she said carefully. He's been an adult for 8 years now, but I'll tell you what I can, provided your interest is genuine and not just idle curiosity. It's genuine, Harold assured her. I believe I may be in a position to help him with his business venture, but I need to understand who he is before I make that kind of commitment. Something in Harold's tone must have convinced her, because Sister Catherine's posture relaxed slightly. She pulled a thick folder from one of her desk drawers and opened it, revealing a collection of documents, photographs, and handwritten notes spanning nearly 2 decades. Marcus came to us when he was 7, she began, her voice taking on the practiced cadence of someone who told this story many times to social workers, court officials, and the occasional journalist. January 15, 1997, his parents were killed in a car accident on Interstate 95. Drunk driver ran a red light. She pulled out a photograph and handed it to Harold. It showed a small black boy with serious dark eyes, sitting stiffly in what appeared to be a formal portrait. Even at 7, Marcus possessed the quiet dignity that Harold had observed in the adult version. No extended family, Harold asked.
His father had a sister somewhere, but they'd lost touch years before Marcus was born. His mother was an only child. Social services tried to track down the father's sister, but Sister Catherine shrugged. Sometimes people disappear completely from each other's lives. Marcus's father had moved around a lot as a young man, and family connections just faded away. Harold studied the photograph, trying to imagine the trauma and confusion that 7-year-old Marcus must have experienced. The loss of everything familiar, the bewilderment of being placed with strangers, the gradual realization that his parents weren't coming back. How did he adapt? Harold asked. Sister Catherine smiled, the first genuinely warm expression Harold had seen from her during their conversation. Better than most, worse than some, she said. Marcus was always mature for his age, had to be, I think. But he was also incredibly protective of the younger children from day one. Even as a new arrival, still grieving and confused, he'd comfort kids who were crying, share his toys, help with reading time. She pulled out another photograph, this one showing a slightly older Marcus, maybe 10 or 11, kneeling beside a much younger child, helping the boy tie his shoes. The concentration on both their faces was apparent even in the grainy snapshot. By the time he was 12, he was essentially my unofficial assistant, Sister Catherine continued. He'd help the little ones with homework, mediate disputes, organize activities. Other kids looked up to him naturally, not because he demanded respect, but because he earned it every single day. Harold could see the progression clearly. The traumatized 7-year-old had transformed into a natural leader, finding purpose and healing through caring for others.
What about his education? Harold asked. Excellent student. Not brilliant necessarily, but incredibly dedicated. He'd stay up until midnight studying, then wake up early to help get the younger kids ready for school. His teachers all said the same thing. Marcus worked harder than students with twice his natural ability. Sister Catherine pulled out a report card dated 1999. Straight A's in every subject, with handwritten comments from teachers praising Marcus's work ethic, leadership qualities, and helpfulness to other students. College, Harold prompted. Full academic scholarship to State University. Sister Catherine said with obvious pride. 4 years of environmental science with a business minor. Graduated magna cum laude while working part-time jobs to send money back here for the other kids. Harold raised his eyebrows. He was sending money back even while he was in college, every month. $25, $50, whatever he could manage from his campus jobs. Not much individually, but it added up. Paid for new playground equipment, school supplies, emergency medical expenses when kids got sick. Sister Catherine's voice grew soft with affection. He called every Sunday to check on everyone, came back every holiday, every summer break. The picture of Marcus that emerged from Sister Catherine's account was almost impossibly noble. The orphaned child who'd transformed his grief into a mission of caring for others, who'd never stopped considering the children's home his true family even after achieving the education and opportunities that should have launched him into a very different life. After graduation, Harold asked. We all thought he'd move away, start a career somewhere with better opportunities than this neighborhood could offer. His professors were encouraging him to pursue graduate school, maybe work for the EPA or a major environmental consulting firm. Sister Catherine shook her head ruefully. Instead he came back here and rented that little apartment 3 blocks away. Said his real work was just beginning. She showed Harold a recent photograph of Marcus with the current group of children, all of them clustered around him like iron filings drawn to a magnet. His face in the picture showed the same patience and warmth Harold had observed that afternoon. The recycling business idea, Harold prompted. Started developing it about 2 years ago. Spent months walking through every neighborhood in the district, cataloging waste patterns, researching recycling technologies, studying community development models from other cities. Sister Catherine pulled out a thick binder and opened it to reveal pages of charts, graphs, and meticulously organized data. This is just a fraction of his research. He's probably generated more environmental impact data on this area than any official agency. Harold flipped through the pages, impressed despite himself by the thoroughness and sophistication of Marcus's work. This wasn't the amateur enthusiasm of an idealistic dreamer, this was professional-level research backed by solid scientific methodology. And the loan applications? Harold asked. Sister Catherine's expression darkened slightly. 4 banks, 3 credit unions, 2 community development organizations. Every one of them said the same thing. Interesting concept, good research, but insufficient collateral and no established business track record. Which means they wanted him to risk property he doesn't have to guarantee loans for a business model they don't understand. Sister Catherine's voice carried a note of frustration. Meanwhile, they'll loan money to anyone who wants to open another fast food restaurant or check cashing place. Harold understood the bind perfectly. Banks were willing to fund proven business models backed by tangible assets, but innovations required taking risks that institutional lenders were structurally incapable of accepting. Marcus had developed exactly the kind of solution that communities desperately needed, but he lacked the financial resources to implement it. What does Marcus think will happen? Harold asked. He keeps trying. Refines his business plan, looks for grants, applies to business development programs. But honestly, Sister Catherine sighed deeply. I think he's starting to lose hope. He'd never admit it, especially not to the children, but I can see it wearing him down. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, Harold processing everything he'd learned while Sister Catherine organized the contents of Marcus's file. Outside, the children's voices had grown quieter as afternoon shifted toward evening. Sister Catherine, Harold said finally, in your professional opinion, what kind of person is Marcus Johnson? She looked up from the papers scattered across her desk, meeting Harold's gaze directly. Marcus is the kind of person this world needs more of, she said simply. He's someone who believes that taking care of others isn't just the right thing to do, it's the only thing worth doing. He's built his entire adult life around that principle, and I've never seen him waver from it, not even when it would have been easier to choose differently. Harold nodded slowly, his mind made up. Thank you, he said, standing to leave. You've given me exactly the information I needed. The Whitmore mansion sat on 3 acres of manicured grounds in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, its Georgian colonial architecture speaking of old money and established power. Inside, the decor struck a balance between elegance and comfort, expensive but not ostentatious, traditional but not stuffy. It was the home of people who had nothing left to prove to anyone. Harold found his wife Eleanor in the sunroom, reading beneath a table lamp that cast warm light across her silver hair. She looked up as he entered, immediately sensing from his expression that something significant had occurred during his day. You look like a man who's had his assumptions challenged, Eleanor observed, marking her place in the novel she'd been reading. After 35 years of marriage, she could read Harold's moods as easily as the pages of her book. Harold settled into the chair across from her, loosening his tie with the weary gesture of someone who'd spent the day processing unexpected revelations. Do you remember me mentioning the young man who returned my wallet earlier this week? He began. The one you thought was homeless. Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly. What about him? His name is Marcus Johnson, and I was wrong about almost everything. Over the next hour, Harold recounted his day, the accidental discovery of Marcus at the children's home, the conversation with Sister Catherine, the gradual unveiling of a story that challenged every assumption he'd made based on appearances. Eleanor listened without interruption, her expression growing more thoughtful as Harold described Marcus's research, his devotion to the children, his frustrated attempts to secure funding for a business that could transform the entire district. So this young man, Eleanor said when Harold finished, has spent 8 years of his adult life essentially sacrificing his own advancement to care for children who aren't even related to him. That's exactly what he's done, Harold confirmed. And not just care for them, he's trying to build something that will create opportunities for them, clean up their environment, give them a better future than this neighborhood has traditionally offered. Eleanor was quiet for several minutes, staring out the sunroom windows at their perfectly maintained gardens. Harold had learned long ago to respect these silences. His wife processed complex situations by thinking them through completely before speaking. What are you planning to do? She asked finally. Harold had been asking himself the same question during the drive home. His instincts as an investor were telling him that Marcus represented exactly the kind of opportunity he'd built his fortune by recognizing: solid character, innovative thinking, deep community connections, and a willingness to work harder than anyone else to achieve his goals. But something deeper was also at work. Harold had spent decades building wealth and accumulating success, but when was the last time he'd encountered someone whose ambitions were entirely focused on lifting up others? When was the last time he'd met someone who'd consistently chosen service over self-interest? I'm thinking about offering to fund his business, Harold said slowly. Eleanor nodded as if she'd expected this answer. Not as charity, Harold continued, but as a legitimate investment. From everything I observed today, and everything Sister Catherine told me, Marcus has developed a genuinely innovative approach to community recycling. The business model is sound, his research is thorough, and his understanding of the local market is probably better than any outside consultant could provide. And you think it could be profitable? Harold considered this carefully. In truth, he hadn't yet analyzed Marcus's business plan with the ruthless financial scrutiny he applied to his usual investments. But what he had seen suggested that Marcus possessed something more valuable than most entrepreneurs, an intimate understanding of his market combined with unshakable commitment to serving it. I think it could be transformational, Harold said. Maybe not in the traditional sense of generating massive returns, but in terms of actually solving problems that need solving. How many investments can you say that about? Eleanor smiled, the expression transforming her face with warmth and pride. I'd like to meet him, she said simply. Marcus, this young man who's captured your imagination so completely. If you're considering making him our partner in what sounds like a significant venture, I should probably form my own opinion. Harold felt a flutter of uncertainty. Eleanor had excellent instincts about people, better than his own, if he was being honest. She could spot insincerity, hidden agendas, and character flaws that Harold sometimes missed in his focus on business potential. What if she saw something in Marcus that would change Harold's assessment? But then again, if Marcus couldn't pass Eleanor's scrutiny, he probably wasn't the right person to trust with a significant investment anyway. I'll arrange a meeting, Harold said, though I should warn you, he doesn't know who I am or what I'm worth. He might be a bit overwhelmed if we approach this wrong. Eleanor laughed softly. Harold, from everything you've told me, this young man has been caring for a dozen children while working multiple jobs and developing a business plan to save his entire neighborhood. I doubt he's easily overwhelmed by anything. Marcus's apartment was a study in efficient simplicity. The entire space couldn't have been more than 500 square feet, with a kitchen that consisted of a refrigerator, a two-burner stove, and a sink that had seen better decades. The living room held a small couch that clearly doubled as a bed, a folding table that served as both dining surface and desk, and shelves made from boards and cinder blocks. But what struck Harold and Eleanor most immediately were the walls. Every available surface was covered with Marcus's research. Charts showing waste generation patterns throughout the district. Maps marked with potential recycling collection points. Photographs of different neighborhoods with detailed notes about local conditions. Technical diagrams of processing equipment, financial projections, environmental impact studies. It was like stepping into the mind of someone obsessed with solving a complex puzzle, every piece of information carefully catalogued and cross-referenced with every other piece. Marcus himself seemed smaller in his own space than he had at the children's home, as if the confidence he projected when surrounded by the kids had been replaced by a quiet vulnerability. He'd changed from his work clothes into clean jeans and a button-down shirt, but his nervous energy was obvious as he cleared papers from chairs so his unexpected visitors could sit down. I apologize for the mess, Marcus said, gesturing at the organized chaos surrounding them. I wasn't expecting, that is, I don't usually have. Please don't apologize, Eleanor said warmly, settling into the offered chair and looking around with genuine interest. This is fascinating. Harold told me about your recycling research, but seeing it all laid out like this, she trailed off, studying a detailed chart showing the correlation between population density and waste generation patterns in different parts of the district. Even to her untrained eye, the level of analysis was impressive. You've put together quite a comprehensive study, Harold observed, examining a three-dimensional model of what appeared to be a small recycling facility. How long did all this take you? Marcus relaxed slightly, warming to the subject that clearly consumed most of his waking thoughts. About 2.5 years of active research, he said, moving to stand beside a large map of the district that was covered with different colored pins. But I've been thinking about the basic problem much longer than that. Growing up in this neighborhood, you can't help but notice how much waste gets generated and how little of it gets processed efficiently. He pointed to different areas of the map as he spoke, his initial nervousness giving way to passionate engagement with his subject. The traditional recycling model assumes people will sort their waste and transport it to centralized facilities. But in low-income neighborhoods, that creates barriers. People working multiple jobs don't have time for complex sorting systems.
Limited transportation means they can't easily get to recycling centers, and the economic incentives aren't structured to reward participation. Eleanor found herself leaning forward, caught up in Marcus's explanation despite having no background in environmental science or urban planning. "So your solution is," she prompted. "Community-based processing with door-to-door collection," Marcus replied, moving to another chart that showed his proposed operational model. Small facilities located within neighborhoods, staffed by local residents, collecting mixed recyclables that get sorted and processed on-site, lower barriers to participation, immediate economic benefits for the community, and much more efficient resource recovery. Harold studied the financial projections spread across Marcus's folding table. Even with his limited time to review them, he could see that the numbers were realistic and carefully researched. This wasn't wishful thinking disguised as business planning, this was solid analysis backed by extensive data collection. "Have you tested any aspects of this model?" Harold asked. Marcus smiled for the first time since they'd arrived, his face lighting up with genuine enthusiasm. "Small scale, yes. I've been running a pilot program with about 20 families in the building next door. They save their recyclables, I collect and sort everything, then I take it to existing processing centers and split the revenue with the families." He pulled out a notebook filled with handwritten records, dates, weights, materials types, revenue figures. "It's been running for 6 months now. Participation rate is 95%, revenue per household averages about $15 per month, and we've diverted approximately 2 tons of material from the waste stream." Eleanor did quick mental math. $15 per month might not sound like much to her, but for families struggling to make ends meet, an extra $180 per year could make a real difference. "And if you scaled this up?" she asked. Marcus moved to a projection chart that showed his calculations for neighborhood-wide implementation. "Conservative estimates suggest we could serve about 5,000 households in the initial target area. That translates to roughly 30 tons of recyclable material per month, generating approximately $75,000 in monthly revenue while creating 15 to 20 full-time jobs." Harold whistled softly. Those numbers weren't spectacular by his usual standards, but they represented genuine economic activity where none had existed before. More importantly, they suggested that Marcus's model could be financially self-sustaining rather than dependent on ongoing subsidies. "The environmental impact?" Harold asked. "Significant," Marcus replied immediately. "We're looking at diverting roughly 360 tons of waste annually from landfills, reducing truck traffic to distant processing facilities by about 40%, and creating a closed-loop system that keeps resources circulating within the community." As Marcus spoke, Eleanor found herself studying his face more than his charts and graphs. She'd met many entrepreneurs over the years, people pitching Harold on various investment opportunities. Most of them radiated ambition, focused intensely on the potential returns and personal benefits their ventures might generate. Marcus was different. When he talked about revenue, he immediately connected it to jobs for his neighbors. When he discussed efficiency improvements, he framed them in terms of benefits for participating families. When he described environmental impacts, his focus was on creating a healthier community for children to grow up in. This wasn't someone trying to get rich, this was someone trying to build something meaningful. But as Eleanor continued to observe Marcus, she noticed something else, something that made her catch her breath slightly. Around his eyes, in the shape of his cheekbones, in the way he held his head when he was thinking, there was something achingly familiar, something that stirred memories she thought were buried decades deep. "Marcus," she said quietly, interrupting his explanation of processing equipment specifications, "may I ask about your family background?" Marcus's enthusiasm dimmed slightly, the shadow that always crossed his face when the conversation turned to personal history. "I lost my parents when I was 7, he said simply. "Car accident. I was raised at the children's home where you met me today." "Before that," Eleanor pressed gently, "what do you remember about your parents?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to share with these virtual strangers who had taken such unexpected interest in his work. "My father was born and raised in Detroit," he said finally, "worked as an engineer for a manufacturing company here in the city. My mother was from Georgia originally, but she moved north for college. They met at a community event, I think." Eleanor's heart was beating faster, but she kept her voice steady. "Do you have any photographs of them?" Marcus hesitated, then moved to a small shelf where a single framed photograph sat among his reference books. He handed it to Eleanor with the careful reverence of someone sharing a precious treasure. The photograph showed a young black couple with a small boy, Marcus at perhaps 5 years old. The man was tall and serious looking, wearing glasses and a collared shirt. The woman was smiling warmly, her arm around her husband's waist. Eleanor stared at the photograph for a long moment, her hands beginning to tremble slightly. "Oh my God," she whispered. Harold leaned over to see what had caused such a strong reaction from his wife. Eleanor was staring at the photograph as if she'd seen a ghost. "Eleanor," Harold asked with concern. "What is it?" Eleanor looked up at Marcus, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Marcus," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "what was your father's name?" "David," Marcus replied, confused by the intensity of Eleanor's reaction. "David Johnson." "Well, that wasn't his birth name. He changed it legally when he was 18. His birth name was David Patterson." Eleanor made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "David Patterson," she repeated. "My baby brother." The silence in Marcus's small apartment stretched like a held breath. Harold stared at his wife in shocked recognition, while Marcus looked between them with growing confusion and something that might have been hope flickering in his eyes. "Your brother," Marcus repeated slowly, as if testing the words to see if they could possibly be real. Eleanor was crying freely now, still clutching the photograph of Marcus's parents. Her entire body was shaking as decades of buried grief and regret came flooding back. "We lost touch," she whispered, more to herself than to Marcus. "After our parents divorced when David was 16, he went with our mother, I stayed with our father here. We wrote letters for a while, but then, life got complicated. College, careers, marriage." She looked up at Marcus through her tears. "I tried to find him after Harold and I got married, hired investigators, but he'd legally changed his name, and we didn't know." Harold reached over and gently took the photograph from his wife's trembling hands, studying the faces with new understanding. Now that he knew what to look for, he could see traces of Eleanor in the man's features, the same determined jawline, the same intelligent eyes. "Marcus," Harold said quietly, "your father was Eleanor's younger brother. That makes you our nephew." The words seemed to hang in the air like something too large and impossible to be absorbed all at once. Marcus sank onto his couch, staring at Harold and Eleanor as if they might disappear if he looked away. "I have family," he said, so quietly they almost couldn't hear him. "Actual family." Eleanor stood up abruptly, and crossed to where Marcus sat, kneeling beside the couch and taking his hands in hers. "You have family," she confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. "You have an aunt who has been looking for any trace of David for 30 years. You have an uncle who," she glanced back at Harold, "who wants very much to get to know the man his nephew has become." Marcus looked down at Eleanor's hands holding his soft manicured hands that spoke of a life very different from his own rough work-worn fingers. "All this time," he murmured, "all those years at the children's home, working, struggling, and I had family."
The pain in his voice was enough to break hearts. Harold found himself thinking of all the nights Marcus had probably lain awake wondering if anyone in the world shared his blood, wondering if he was truly alone. All those years of believing himself to be completely orphaned when family had been living just across the city. "Marcus," Eleanor said urgently, "I want you to come home with us. Tonight. We have plenty of room, we can set up a proper workspace for your research, you can—" But Marcus was already shaking his head, gently pulling his hands free from Eleanor's grasp. "I can't," he said firmly, though his voice carried genuine regret. "What do you mean you can't?" Harold asked, confused. "Marcus, we're family, we want to help you, to give you the opportunities you should have had all along." Marcus stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the familiar neighborhood that had shaped his entire adult life. When he turned back to face them, his expression was resolute. "I appreciate what you're offering," he said carefully, "more than you can possibly know. To find out that I'm not alone in the world, that I have family who wants to know me, it's everything I used to dream about as a child." "But," Eleanor prompted, though she was beginning to understand. "But I have responsibilities here," Marcus continued, gesturing toward the research covering his walls. "The children at the home, they count on me. The families participating in my pilot recycling program, they're depending on this project to succeed. This community, it raised me, shaped me, gave me purpose. I can't just walk away from it now, especially not when I'm so close to potentially making a real difference. Harold felt a mixture of admiration and frustration. Marcus was turning down financial security, family connections and opportunities that most people would leap at without hesitation, but he was turning them down for the most noble possible reasons. Marcus, Harold said, what if you didn't have to choose? What if we could help you achieve your goals here while still being part of our family? Marcus looked at him with guarded interest. What do you mean? Harold took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would change all their lives irrevocably. I mean, I'd like to invest in your recycling business, not as charity, not as family obligation, but as a legitimate business partnership. I've reviewed your research, I understand your model, and I believe it has genuine potential. Marcus stared at him for a long moment. You want to invest in my project? I want to help you build something that will transform this community, Harold corrected. Because I believe that's exactly what you're capable of doing, and because I think this neighborhood, our nephew's neighborhood, deserves that kind of transformation. For the first time since learning about his family connection, Marcus smiled. You really think it could work? I think you've already proven it could work, Harold replied. Your pilot program shows the model is viable. Your research demonstrates genuine community need. Your commitment to the project is unquestionable. What you lack is capital, and that's a problem I can solve. Eleanor stood up and joined them, her earlier tears replaced by a look of fierce pride. We're not asking you to abandon your mission, Marcus, she said. We're asking you to let family help you accomplish it. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, looking back and forth between his newfound aunt and uncle, then at the research that represented years of his life's work. If we did this, he said slowly, it would be a real business partnership. With contracts and expectations and accountability. Absolutely, Harold confirmed. I've been in business for 40 years, Marcus. I don't invest in projects I don't believe in, family or no family, and the children's home, my responsibilities there, would continue exactly as they always have, Eleanor said immediately. In fact, if your business succeeds the way you've projected, you'll be in an even better position to support the home and the children. Marcus walked over to his research wall and stood looking at the charts and graphs that represented his vision for community transformation. When he turned back to face them, his expression was one of quiet determination mixed with profound gratitude. Then yes, he said simply, let's build something together. 18 months later, the transformation was visible from blocks away. The Marcus Johnson Community Recycling Center occupied a renovated warehouse on the corner of Maple and 3rd Streets, its bright green and blue exterior making it impossible to miss. Through the large windows, passers-by could see the constant activity inside, workers in safety gear sorting materials, loading processing equipment, operating the compressed air systems that separated different types of plastics. The neighborhood around the center had transformed as well. Clean sidewalks replaced cracked concrete. Small businesses had opened in previously vacant storefronts. The corner market that had once struggled to stay open now thrived, serving the employees and visitors who came to the recycling center daily. On this particular Tuesday morning, Marcus stood on a small platform at one end of the main processing floor, addressing a group of about 50 people who had come for the monthly community meeting. Representatives from local schools, neighborhood organizations, small business owners, and families who participated in the recycling program filled folding chairs arranged in neat rows. The Marcus of 18 months ago would have been nervous speaking to such a crowd, but success and experience had given him confidence, and his genuine passion for the work made public speaking feel natural. Thanks to everyone for coming, Marcus began, his voice carrying easily through the space. I wanted to share some numbers from last month that I think you'll find encouraging. He clicked a remote, and a projection screen behind him displayed a colorful chart showing various metrics. In September, we processed 42 tons of recyclable material, our highest monthly total to date. That translates to approximately $96,000 in revenue, which means our participating households received an average of $22 each in recycling payments. A murmur of approval rippled through the audience. $22 might not sound like much to outsiders, but for families living paycheck to paycheck, it represented grocery money, school supplies, or a portion of the monthly electricity bill. More importantly, Marcus continued, we're now employing 28 people full-time, with an average wage of $16 per hour plus benefits. Every single one of these jobs has gone to district residents, and our employee retention rate is 97%.
In the back of the room, Harold and Eleanor sat quietly, watching their nephew with undisguised pride. Harold had attended several of these monthly meetings over the past year, and he never tired of seeing Marcus in his element, confident, informative, deeply connected to the community he served. But what struck Harold most was how little Marcus had fundamentally changed despite his success. He still lived in the same small apartment, still visited the children's home every weekend, still walked through the neighborhood collecting data and talking to residents about their needs and concerns. Success had refined Marcus's abilities and expanded his impact, but it hadn't altered his core character. The environmental impact continues to exceed our projections, Marcus went on, switching to a new slide. We've diverted over 400 tons of material from landfills this year, reduced local waste management costs by approximately 30%, and decreased truck traffic to distant processing facilities by more than half. Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived 2 blocks away and had been one of the first families to join the recycling program, raised her hand. Marcus, my grandson wants to know if you're planning to expand to other neighborhoods like you talked about last year. Marcus smiled, the expression transforming his face with warmth and excitement. Actually, that's one of the announcements I wanted to make today. We've been approved for expansion into the Eastwood district, with operations beginning in January. We'll be hiring an additional 15 employees and serving roughly 3,000 more households. The room erupted in applause and excited chatter. Harold found himself grinning as he watched the community's reaction to this news. These weren't investors celebrating projected returns. These were neighbors celebrating the success of someone who had never stopped being one of their own. As the formal meeting wound down and people began forming smaller conversation groups, Harold noticed Marcus being approached by a steady stream of individuals with questions, suggestions, and expressions of gratitude. A teenage boy wanted to know about summer internship opportunities. An elderly man thanked Marcus for helping his daughter get one of the processing jobs. A middle-aged woman asked if the recycling center might consider adding electronics recycling to their services. Marcus handled each interaction with patience and genuine interest, never making anyone feel rushed or dismissed. He remembered names, asked about family members, and listened carefully to every suggestion as if it might contain the key to solving some problem he hadn't yet considered. "He's remarkable," Eleanor murmured to Harold, as they watched Marcus crouch down to speak at eye level with a young girl who seemed to be explaining some complex idea involving her drawings. "Yes," Harold agreed. "He is." As the crowd thinned out, Marcus made his way over to where Harold and Eleanor were standing. "Thank you for coming," he said, though after 18 months their regular attendance at these meetings had become routine. "I know these presentations can be a bit technical." "Technical?" Eleanor laughed. "Marcus, watching you discuss environmental impact statistics is like watching an artist explain his masterpiece. There's nothing dry about passion." Marcus ducked his head slightly, still uncomfortable with direct praise despite his obvious success. "Any feedback on the expansion plans?" he asked Harold, shifting the conversation back to business. "I think you're being appropriately cautious with the timeline," Harold replied. "Better to scale thoughtfully than to grow too fast and compromise quality. Your reputation in this community is your most valuable asset." As they talked, Harold found himself reflecting on the broader impact of Marcus's success. The young man had not only built a profitable business and created meaningful employment, he had demonstrated a model that could be replicated in communities across the country. Environmental sustainability, economic development, and social empowerment wrapped into a single elegant solution. More than that, Marcus had proven something that Harold's decades in business had taught him to value above all else: that character and competence, combined with unwavering commitment, could overcome almost any obstacle. "I should head over to the children's home," Marcus said, checking his watch. "Tuesday is homework help day, and Tommy's been struggling with his algebra." Harold smiled. Of course Marcus was going to the children's home. Success hadn't changed his priorities any more than it had changed his address. "Give our love to Sister Catherine and the children," Eleanor said, hugging Marcus goodbye. As Harold and Eleanor walked to their car, Harold caught a glimpse of Marcus in the side mirror, heading down the street toward the children's home, with the same purposeful stride he'd had when carrying bottles through dark alleys 2 years earlier. The only difference was that now his research had become reality, his vision had become impact, and his dreams had become a legacy that would shape the community for generations. That evening, As they drove through the transformed neighborhood, Harold pointed out the changes that had occurred since Marcus's recycling center had opened. New businesses, cleaner streets, children playing safely in areas that had once been dangerous after dark. "Do you think we found Marcus, or did he find us?" Eleanor asked as they paused at a red light. Harold considered the question, thinking about the series of apparent coincidences that had brought them together: the dropped wallet, the community visit, the accidental discovery of Marcus at the children's home. "I think," Harold said finally, "that sometimes the universe has a way of connecting people who need each other, even when they don't realize they need each other." Eleanor nodded, remembering the young man who had refused their money but accepted their partnership, who had turned down their comfortable home but welcomed their family connection, who had transformed their investment into community transformation. Through the car window, they could see Marcus in the distance, surrounded by children in the playground of the children's home. Even from far away, his joy was evident as he pushed kids on swings and helped them navigate the monkey bars. "Marcus was right about one thing," Eleanor said softly. "What's that?" "Sometimes the most worthwhile dreams really are the hardest ones to make real, but when they do become real," she gestured toward the scene in front of them, children laughing, neighbors talking on clean sidewalks, the warm glow of the recycling center's lights promising another day of meaningful work tomorrow. "When they do become real," she continued, "they change everything." The light turned green, and Harold drove slowly through the neighborhood that had become, in its way, as much their family's legacy as Marcus's individual achievement. In the distance, the children's voices carried on the evening air, sounds of joy and safety, and the promise of futures that were brighter because one young man had refused to stop believing that change was possible. Marcus Johnson had built more than a business. He had built a bridge between what the world was and what it could become, and he had done it one conversation, one relationship, one act of service at a time. 5 years later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the Marcus Chen Community Development Center, illuminating a conference room filled with representatives from 12 different cities. Maps, charts and business plans covered every surface as community leaders, environmental scientists, and social entrepreneurs gathered around the polished oak table that had been a gift from Harold and Eleanor on the center's 3rd anniversary. Marcus, now 33, and bearing the quiet confidence that came from years of proven success, stood at the head of the table addressing the assembled group. His voice carried the same passion it always had, but now it was tempered with the wisdom of experience and the authority of demonstrated results. "The Detroit pilot program launched 6 months ago," Marcus was saying, clicking through a presentation that showed before and after photographs of neighborhoods transformed. "They're processing 38 tons of material monthly and have created 42 full-time positions. The community participation rate is running at 93%. Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the room. Dr. Sarah Martinez from Phoenix leaned forward, studying the financial projections displayed on the screen. "The revenue model scales beautifully," she observed. "But what about the initial community buy-in? How do you overcome skepticism in neighborhoods that have been disappointed by promises before?" Marcus smiled, the expression carrying echoes of the young man who had once patiently explained recycling symbols to children in a community center. "You start small, you stay consistent, and you never promise more than you can deliver. Trust isn't built through presentations, it's built through showing up every day and doing exactly what you said you would do." In the back of the room, Sister Catherine sat quietly, her hair now completely gray but her eyes still bright with the satisfaction of watching someone she'd helped raise become exactly the man she'd always known he could be. Beside her, Harold and Eleanor occupied their usual seats at Marcus's public events, their faces glowing with the particular pride that came from watching families succeed not just financially but morally. The questions continued for another hour, covering everything from equipment specifications to community engagement strategies. Marcus answered each inquiry with the thoroughness that had characterized his approach since those early days of sorting bottles in dark alleys, but now his responses carried the weight of proven methodology and measurable impact. When the formal session ended, people clustered around Marcus with business cards and follow-up questions. A young woman from Oakland wanted to discuss adapting the model for communities with high immigrant populations. A city councilman from Memphis had questions about municipal partnership structures. An environmental justice advocate from Newark was interested in the health outcome data from Marcus's original district. As the crowd gradually thinned, Harold found himself standing beside Marcus, watching the last of the visitors pack up their materials. 12 cities, Harold mused. When you first showed me those charts in your apartment, did you ever imagine it would spread like this? Marcus was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting toward the window where the original recycling center was visible in the distance, still operating at full capacity, and now serving as the flagship location for what had become a national movement. I hoped it might work in one neighborhood, Marcus replied honestly. I dreamed it might help the kids at Sister Catherine's home grow up in a cleaner, safer place, but this, he gestured toward the conference room, where city officials from across the country had just spent hours dissecting his business model with the intention of replicating it in their own communities. This is bigger than anything I imagined. Eleanor approached, carrying a manila folder thick with correspondence. The foundation received 43 new applications this month, she announced. Communities from Oregon to Florida want to implement the Chen model. The Marcus Chen Foundation for Community Development had been Eleanor's idea, established 3 years earlier when it became clear that the demand for Marcus's expertise far exceeded his ability to personally consult with every interested community. The foundation provided grants, technical assistance, and training programs to help neighborhoods across the country establish their own recycling and community development initiatives. Any that stand out? Marcus asked, accepting the folder and flipping through the applications with the same careful attention he'd once devoted to cataloging waste patterns. There's one from a town in rural Alabama that's particularly compelling, Eleanor replied. They've got a paper mill that closed down, left the whole community economically devastated. But they've got strong community leadership, and they think recycling could be the foundation for broader economic redevelopment. Marcus nodded, making a note on the application. Every community that reached out to him represented people who were struggling, who were looking for solutions, who needed someone to believe in their potential for transformation. It was impossible to help them all, but Marcus had learned that strategic support could create ripple effects that extended far beyond any single initiative. As the afternoon wound down, Marcus made his familiar walk to the children's home, where a new generation of kids now gathered around him with the same eager anticipation their predecessors had shown. Tommy, the marine biology enthusiast, was now 21 and working as a lab technician at the local university while studying for his bachelor's degree. Sophie, the artist, had received a scholarship to art school and sent Marcus a painting every few months depicting various scenes from the transformed neighborhood. But there were always new children arriving, new young minds that needed encouragement and guidance. Marcus settled onto the familiar worn carpet of the activity room, surrounded by 8-year-olds who wanted to hear about his meetings with important people from far away and 10-year-olds who were curious about whether recycling really could help save the planet. Marcus, asked a serious-faced girl named Destiny, when I grow up, can I help clean up neighborhoods too? Marcus looked at her earnest expression, seeing in her eyes the same determination that had driven him through years of research and rejection, the same hope that had sustained him through the darkest moments of doubt. Destiny, he said, his voice carrying the weight of experience and the lightness of possibility, the world needs people who care about making things better. If that's what you want to do, then that's exactly what you should do. And when you're ready, I'll be here to help you figure out how. As evening settled over the district, Marcus walked the familiar streets that had shaped him, noting the small changes that most people would never see but that represented the accumulation of thousands of individual decisions toward something better. A new mural on the side of the community center, solar panels on a roof that had been bare the year before, children playing on sidewalks that were clean and safe. The young man who had once walked these same streets carrying bags of bottles and dreams of transformation had become exactly what the community needed, not a savior who swooped in from outside, but a neighbor who had never stopped believing that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they worked together toward a common purpose. The recycling center's lights glowed steady and bright in the gathering darkness, a beacon not just of environmental responsibility or economic development, but of the fundamental truth that had driven Marcus from the very beginning, that communities could heal themselves if someone was willing to show them how, and that the most profound changes often began with the simplest acts of service.